Everyone thinks they know the Vikings. Big, hairy guys with horned helmets, which they never wore, by the way, jumping off a long ship and ruining a perfectly good Tuesday for some monks. And sure, that happened. But framing the entire Viking Age around raiding is like describing modern commerce by only talking about hostile takeovers. It misses the point entirely. Raiding wasn't the goal, it was a business strategy. The most brutally effective, high-risk, high-reward market entry strategy imaginable. The real story, the one that actually explains their impact, is about what they did after they kicked the door in. They were merchants, globalists, the most ambitious, far-reaching, and morally flexible traders of the early medieval world. Their product line was simple: anything they could get their hands on. While some Vikings were busy being a nuisance in England, the cleverest ones looked east. They took one look at the rivers of modern-day Russia and Ukraine, the Dnieper, the Volga, and didn't see impassable terrain. They saw a highway, a very inconvenient highway that sometimes required carrying your entire boat over dry land, but a highway nonetheless. These Swedish Vikings, who came to be known as the Rus, paddled and dragged their ships south. They were chasing rumors of the two wealthiest places on earth, the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad and the Byzantine Empire. What did they bring? The treasures of the North Woods, luxurious furs from squirrels, martens, and sables, also honey, wax, and a truly staggering number of people they'd captured along the way, because nothing funded an expedition quite like selling your neighbors. The Arabs and Byzantines weren't particularly interested in honey. They had plenty. What they did have was silver, specifically Arab silver dirhams. For the Vikings, these little coins were an absolute obsession. Archaeologists have found over 200,000 of them in Scandinavia, more than in any other region outside the Caliphate itself. The Spillings hoard, found on the Swedish island of Gotland, contained over 14,000 coins, weighing more than 67 kilograms. That's an absurd amount of wealth. And they weren't just using it as cash, they valued it by weight. It was common practice to take a beautifully minted coin with intricate calligraphy, test its purity with a small nick, and then just chop it into pieces. To an Arab merchant, this was sacrilege. To a Viking, it was just good accounting. The ultimate destination for the eastern-bound Vikings was the city they called Miklagard, the Great City, Constantinople. Imagine showing up from a Scandinavian village of a few hundred people to a metropolis of 500,000, with massive walls, aqueducts, and the Hagia Sophia. The culture shock must have been profound. These weren't just trading partners. The Byzantines were customers for the Vikings' other primary skill: targeted violence. The most elite and trusted imperial bodyguards became the Varangian Guard, composed entirely of Norsemen. They were paid a fortune, given access to the palace, and were famous for their loyalty and their epic drinking bouts. They were so trusted because, as foreign mercenaries, they had no stake in local politics. They were just there to protect the emperor and get paid. A surprisingly stable arrangement in a city defined by backstabbing. The western routes were less glamorous but just as profitable. Instead of silk and silver, the trade with the British Isles and Francia was about staples. The Vikings established massive trading hubs in the cities they conquered, like Dyflin, modern Dublin, and Jorvik, which you might know as York. These weren't just military outposts, they were cosmopolitan centers of commerce. From Ireland, they exported hides and, inevitably, people. From England, they got wool and wheat. In return, they brought in goods from their vast network. Things like Rhenish pottery from Germany, honest-to-goodness wine from France, and walrus ivory from Greenland. So you could be an Anglo-Saxon lord drinking French wine from a German pot, wondering if you should buy a fancy ivory chess piece brought to you by the same people who burned down your local church last year. Business is business. Then there was the truly insane trade route, the North Atlantic. Vikings colonized Iceland, then Greenland, pushing the limits of what was considered habitable. Why? Not for the scenic glaciers. They were chasing Arctic luxury goods. The most important was walrus ivory. Before elephant ivory became widely available again, walrus tusks were the premium material for crafting everything from crucifixes to game pieces. It was the high-status plastic of the Middle Ages. Then there were narwhal tusks, which were passed off to gullible European nobles as unicorn horns for frankly absurd prices. Let's just appreciate the sheer audacity. Sailing through iceberg-infested waters, surviving on windswept rocks at the edge of the world, all to hunt a weird whale so you can sell its tooth to a French duke who thinks it's magical. The commitment to the grift is almost admirable. When we picture a Viking ship, we think of the longship. Sleek, fast, terrifying, the dragon-headed sports car of the sea, perfect for surprise parties on undefended coastlines. But that's not what built their economic empire. The real hero of the Viking Age was the Gnar. It was the longship's less attractive, chubby, and deeply practical sibling. Wider, deeper, and with a lot more room for cargo. The Gnar was the container ship of its day. It was slower, sure, but it could carry up to 24 tons of stuff. It wasn't designed for raids, it was designed for hauling timber, wool, silver, and people across the open ocean. No one wrote epic sagas about the Gnar. It's the boring but essential piece of technology that made the whole interconnected world possible. The FedEx truck of the 9th century. All these goods had to go somewhere. They flowed into major trading hubs like Birka in Sweden and Hedeby on the border of Denmark and Germany. These were the proto-cities of the north. Forget the idea of a simple village. Hedeby was a planned settlement with a defensive wall, gridded streets, and a population drawn from all over the known world. You would have heard Old Norse, Slavic, Frankish, and Arabic spoken in the streets. Archaeologists there have found Frankish glass, Rhenish pottery, silk from the Far East, and even a bronze Buddha statuette from northern India. A Buddha in a Viking town. This wasn't some isolated backwater. This was a critical node in a global network, a place where a piece of amber from the Baltic could be traded for a bead made in Asia, all facilitated by a Scandinavian with a big axe and a good sense for profit margins. We have to talk about the darkest side of this enterprise, the product that appears in almost every record of Viking trade: human beings. The slave trade was a cornerstone of the Viking economy. It wasn't an unfortunate byproduct, it was a primary industry. When Vikings raided Ireland, England, or the Slavic lands, they weren't just after portable wealth. They were after people. These captives, called thralls in Norse, were either kept for labor or, more often, sold. The biggest markets were the Byzantine Empire and the Abbasid Caliphate, where there was a huge demand. The Arabic word for the Slavs, sakaliba, became a general term for the fair-skinned slaves the Rus brought down the rivers. It was a brutal, dehumanizing, and immensely profitable business that built fortunes on the destruction of countless lives. A chilling reminder that a booming economy doesn't always have a clean backstory. Ultimately, this global trade network is what ended the Viking Age. All that wealth pouring into Scandinavia had to be controlled. Local chieftains who managed to seize control of a key port or trade route suddenly had the resources to dominate their rivals. This is how kingdoms were born. Men like Harald Bluetooth in Denmark didn't build a kingdom by raiding, but by taxing the raiders and traders passing through. Becoming Christian wasn't just a religious conversion, it was a brilliant business move that made it easier to trade with the rest of Christian Europe. They started minting their own coins, building organized states, and acting less like freelance entrepreneurs and more like proper European kings. In a way, they became victims of their own success. They integrated themselves so perfectly into the global economy that their unique, chaotic identity was absorbed. They got organized and, frankly, a little boring. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!